Good evening, everyone. My name is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Journal Newshour. Oh, it's too dark in here. That's much better. Welcome to the Cameron Journal Newshour. I picked one hell of a time to take a break, didn't I? Just when I end up taking a little bit of a hiatus, the world explodes. And picked the craziest 3 weeks to not do this show. A lot has happened. A lot has transpired, including things that happened up to and including today. And it's a lot. It's a lot. Why haven't I been here? I ordinarily, in years past, I usually take off some or part of the summer for a hiatus, for a break, for travel, all this type of thing. This year, I've been very busy, so I've just kind of been consistently on the grind. And the last couple weeks in September, we had the holiday in the beginning of September, and then I had some personal stuff, and I just was not in a position to do the show. If you subscribe to the newsletter, CameronJournal.com/newsletter, it was just a personal matter sort of thing. However, the best news of all is that my new book, America's Lost Generation, is out now. If you check my Substack, CameronJournal.substack.com, you'll find a new live video I did with David Beckemeyer today, actually, talking about Gen Z men and their drift rightward, which is going to be a very important topic to what this evening is going to be about. And I also talk about America's Lost Generation. It's finally out. You can purchase it. CameronJournal.com. Click on Shop Cameron's Books. Or Amazon if you're not interested in waiting around or bothering with my website. Amazon's also okay too. I make more money if you buy it from me, but Amazon's okay too. I'm also on Walmart.com, Target.com, Barnes & Noble. If you walk into an independent bookstore, my book is available for order. So it's out, it's available. If you've been following my series about millennials, which I have been posting and all this type of thing, then you'll know that we've been talking about it and doing some lead up for quite some time. And it's finally out, and so I've also been busy doing some promos for that and all this sort of thing. And we're having a lot of growth at the Soupcast Podcast Network, and we're so happy to be a part of that. And I have managed to keep up the newsletter, which is on Saturdays, but the news hour has gotten a little bit neglected. And so here I am, and I had a lot of stories kind of sitting in my file, waiting to be talked about and this sort of thing. And a lot of them are irrelevant, although some of the stories that I had saved won't end up talking about because they're not as relevant as they once was. But obviously the big story of the last couple weeks, which again, if you read the newsletter at CameronJournal.com/newsletter, to sign up, obviously it was the terrible assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I wrote at the time in the newsletter that while I didn't agree with many of the things that he said, and I actually only knew about him sort of tangentially, political violence is always 110% wrong. If we want to talk about living in a civilized society, political violence is something that we absolutely cannot have. And in my piece, in my newsletter, I really invite us to remember the humanity. This man was shot in front of his wife and children in public, in broad daylight, by a young 22-year-old man named Tyler Robinson, who, despite the discourse and everything, we actually know very little about, other than he was ever so deeply involved in some of the darkest corners of the internet. I'm not going to take the time to explain to you what a groiper is, or Pepe the Frog, or all that sort of thing. It defies explanation by reasonable, normal people. Suffice it to say, this man was in some of the darker corners of the internet, with which I'm only somewhat familiar, but I recognize some of the symbols a lot more than other people do. And it is yes, rest in peace, Charlie Kirk. And I was, and like I said, I've learned more about Charlie Kirk, and I have watched more clips of his in the last 2 weeks than I have ever. I knew him as kind of the crazy debate guy who sometimes said some very controversial, uncomfortable things, but otherwise was, was, I mean, honestly, not that important. It's like, there's Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson and Charlie, all the there. He was just kind of one of those amorphous guys on the right doing the thing, and I was fine with him doing his thing. I didn't have a problem with that, despite his disagreement. I kind of know how this game is played, and he was a bit of a colleague in a way, and that we're both in these online spaces. I knew about Turning Point USA because I remember when it came along. He founded it when he was 18 years old. I was at the tail end of my time in Republican politics when that sort of thing came along, and it's again, I was really not didn't have an issue with him. Was quite fine for him to continue on, and I have said over and over and over again in the last couple weeks, I wish he were still here, continuing on his journey. It is a sad thing. It is a loss. However, oh, the country has exploded in a way since then. A lot of things have been said. I, have been told, I've read about people who call Democrats the party of terrorism. I have seen people on Twitter say that we needed to kill all liberals, deport them, brand the Democratic Party as a terrorist organization. A lot of really terrible things have been said that is certainly not in the spirit of republicanism, democracy, or even civil discourse. But that is also the time in which we live. And nothing has shown us, I think, all how the internet and social media and algorithms have had a profound and outsized effect on our brains than this particular scandal. While we may wonder why Mr. Robinson is writing certain things on bullets and guns and what some of these, online terms mean, and listening to the sheriff's department in Utah read out internet slang is chef's just absolutely hilarious. Even, all of this sort of thing. There is definitely, this has become a huge, giant cultural flashpoint. I did kind of joke that, it's kind of funny that, after years of complaining, the right reinvented cancel culture from first principles in a week and implemented and got a bunch of people fired for saying terrible things, making terrible videos, all this type of thing. I've never been on the train of doing that to people. I'm the one in 2018 who said why we shouldn't vilify racists and get them fired and all this sort of thing. I was never on the cancel culture choo-choo train back in the day, so I'm not necessarily thrilled about it now. That all being said, I do think people making videos celebrating his death is about one of the most tasteless, crass, completely déclassé things to ever go around and happen. And that, again, is not in the spirit of Republican democracy, small r Republican democracy. And it dehumanizes Charlie Kirk, um, in a way that I just think is not terribly helpful. And this comment is perfect. The left makes shit okay, then they get mad when used against them. And yes, and that is why a lot of us the lot of us in the tens at the time said this isn't a good thing to do, regardless of who's doing it or you agree with it or all this type of thing. It's not a good thing to do. It doesn't do anything for civil discourse. And the way in which I think polarization and emotion, especially when it comes to politics, has absolutely fried everyone's brains, is quite significant, and in the last couple of weeks has been on full display. I think a lot of these things really defy a certain amount of ideology because they're neither left nor right. Pizzagate suffered from this as well. Um, Crazy people do crazy things for crazy reasons, and it certainly does not fit neatly into a political binary. And this is another one, in which it was the kind of the same the same sort of situation. Um, and this and that's, oftentimes the discussions and the talk about so many of these things is completely broken. There are some people that just, are enjoying a certain amount of cultural heft that the right has not had in a great long time. Those of us who said one day this will come back to bite us all in the butt have been proven correct. And 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 now we're still in this kind of very odd cultural moment, and that odd cultural moment definitely brings us to what happened last Wednesday when ABC News put Jimmy Kimmel Live on indefinite hiatus following his, what I found rather milquetoast but controversial comments about the Tyler Robinson, the man who shot Charlie Kirk. And this afternoon, as I was trying to pull it together to see if I could do this show tonight, we have a new announcement, and that is that ABC News has chosen to reinstate Jimmy Kimmel on ABC, and he will be airing his show tomorrow night on Tuesday. And so there's that's kind of been the latest chapter on that. That's kind of the free speech branch discussion. We'll come back to that. I just wanted to kind of mention, for those that are wondering, this, it's still percolating around. I'm just kind of starting to see people find out that Bob Iger has reversed course on this, after it seemed like they wouldn't, because they were tearing out furniture and seemed to be shutting down the studio and all this sort of thing. And now, apparently some discussions and things were had, and broadcast broadcast licenses were threatened. Local affiliates had pulled out and said they were not wanting to air him anymore. Although interestingly, I think it was Nexstar was supposed to air some Charlie Kirk documentary and canceled doing it. And so that's kind of there's been so many branches of discussion, including what's political, how far does free speech go? How far does political speech go? What kind of person, what kind of person was Charlie Kirk? What kind of person was Tyler Robinson? There's been all these different discussions, and it's all been very, very fractious. And I will say, as someone who's definitely liberal and left leaning, it's been a tough time. The 8 months of this administration have been long and very difficult for many of us. The last couple weeks have definitely been quite awkward. I always lean towards focusing on the humanity in people, in each of us. One of the difficulties that I've been working through on a personal level in the midst of all of this is whether there's a future in today's modern polarization for this show and the unique way that I talk about the news. There is no anger here. There is no outrage. I don't do that. I never have. And I don't intend to start. Now, in today's media environment, that may mean the Cameron Journal is not politically relevant. And it may mean that my audience is never that large. And perhaps I will need to learn to accept that. But I believe in a world gone crazy, the most radical thing you can do is try to be sane. Try to remember the old principles that held a society together, that built this country, and to always remind us we are people. And Charlie Kirk was a person. Admittedly, he also headed a $100 million organization at a personal net worth of $12 million. I had no idea he was doing that well, to be very honest with you. He was doing very well. Sort of thing, but he was still a human being. And I always tell people, I said, I feel like oftentimes I can have dinner with Donald Trump. And I agree with him on damn little, but we're still two human beings on this planet, hurtling through space at many thousands of miles per hour. And I think in all the back and forth we get into online, which I'll admit sometimes I enjoy doing as well, we forget, as we kind of used to talk about it in the 90s, the human on the other side of the keyboard, and being mindful that we are humans, we are human beings. And I think one of the kind of terrible things about the online environment these days is that we oftentimes lose our humanity in favor of talking points, in favor of, getting a dopamine rush at saying the perfect phrase or posting the perfect link or owning the libs, owning the right. The priority to get the good, happy brain chemicals or feeding the algorithm is more important than remembering there is a human on the other side of the screen who's going to read that and have their own emotional response to whatever is being said. And I think, for better or for worse, that conversation has been lost. So when something terrible happens, I always think it's time to recall our humanity. Now, does that necessarily mean that the algorithm is going to bless the clips of this show or this show with a lot of views and attention because I'm doing something unique? No. Does that mean that, people are going to galvanize around me? Probably not. I would hope so, but probably not. But it's very important for us to remember the humanity in these days. Returning to the whole Jimmy Kimmel situation, Charlie Kirk was certainly an advocate of free speech, and I think one of the talents that he had was presenting a certain point of view to people who probably would have never heard it otherwise. And again, I couldn't agree with most of the things he said. One of the clips I saw was him talking with his co-host on his podcast, yakking on about why we should bring back public executions and what age it's appropriate to take your kid to them. And I'm kind of like, well, this is the type of content where I'm out, sort of thing. But no one, especially the government, should be stopping anyone from saying those things as long as you're in the bounds of basic public decency. When it comes to free speech, I am a basic public decency kind of guy. I think it's very important, very, very important, to maintain public decency in society, and there are some historical instances where that was very necessary. Obviously, the big one that you would learn in a Media 101 class, and I talked about this on Saturday in the newsletter, was Father Coughlin in the 1930s. Father Coughlin was a Catholic priest who had a nationally syndicated radio show. It's the 30s, radio was the big medium. He had a nationally syndicated radio show in the 1930s, and obviously, in the 1930s, anti-Semitism was a hot topic because of Nazi Germany. And he had started to say some very anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish things on his radio show. And FDR had them pull the plug. And that case is held up in one of two ways. One, it's held up as when free speech goes too far, government has a duty to maintain decency in society. This is the don't yell fire in a crowded theater principle. But it is also held up, especially, in broadcasting, and I came from terrestrial broadcasting, it was also held up as an example of the responsibility when one has an audience and one has a voice and you're speaking on people, one has a responsibility to be mindful of what one is saying. And the internet has definitely, I think, inoculated a lot of people from any sense of that responsibility. And certainly, the streaming companies do not hold streamers to the same high standards as broadcasters with licenses from the government to broadcast. And there has been very little regulation on what certain streamers say, usually until there's a controversy. Kind of the other half of that story right now is Hassan Piker has come under fire, as he usually does, for advocating for terrible amounts of violence. Although, interestingly, on the Charlie Kirk front, he spent a lot of time kind of walking back to some of those comments. But the reality is Twitch, which is his primary platform, is owned by Amazon. And Amazon will have to account for why they continue to allow this man to use their system to, spread these terrible words. And bearing in mind, Hassan Piker is a leftist. So this is me going, eating other crabs in my bucket. And Amazon has to be accountable for that. And I have never, on this show, advocated for people to go out and be violent, nor will I ever. I have never advocated for such things on social media. I may have liked something as a joke somewhere along the way, or retweeted it because it was crazy, but I myself would never, ever encourage you, the viewer, to go out and commit acts of political violence. So if you've ever watched my show or listened to my stuff or read what I do and think it's a call for political violence, reform yourself immediately. Please call a friend or family and get help. And if you can't, and barring all that, please stop watching the show immediately. I will never, ever, ever condone this. I would be much happier if Charlie Kirk were on stream today saying something that I don't agree with. I would feel much, much better, and we would be talking about some other news story today. Perhaps the Epstein files. And I do have a great thing from Bloomberg about his email. We'll get there next week. And so, this is, in a civilized, democratic society, we have to have all points of view, and they have to be existing all together so people can make choices on their own. Now, I think the social media companies certainly tip the scales in certain directions. For many, many years, those scales were tipped in a more leftward direction. And what was acceptable on social media tended to follow a very specific agenda around the racism, LGBT stuff, all this sort of thing. Obviously, in recent years, with some changes, those standards have changed. And that happens in society and in media. As society moves and change and standards shift, it happens. I always laugh when I watch award shows and some of the things that people wear. I'm like, if you told us in 1995 that they would allow a woman in a leotard to be sliding down a pole on television, we would have laughed in your face, because that certainly was not done. I mean, Janet Jackson flashed a little bit of boob on TV once in 2005, and her career was never the same. And if you're watching this on YouTube, YouTube's existence and success is directly related to Janet Jackson doing that on live television on the Super Bowl in 2005. So society goes and grows and changes, and standards change. And the standards on social media have changed. Do I necessarily like sometimes what people are saying or posting? No. Do I agree with it? No. Do I sometimes think that it is particularly asinine and is not doing anything to promote the fair, equitable society in which I envision? Yes. But unfortunately, in an open society that values free speech, oftentimes we have to confront views with which we do not agree. And this also gets into Charlie Kirk's work on college campuses, because he became very well known for confronting college students with ideas they'd never heard before. And I'm always reminded that one, colleges and universities should always be havens for free and open discussion and free speech. I was a bit of a contrarian as an undergrad. I was not very liberal as an undergrad. I did not become more liberal until I was well into my 20s after I got involved in Occupy. If you've been a long time listener, I've told that story many times. I'm not going to retell it right now. And so I oftentimes was in a severe minority on my campus, but I never, ever in the 2.5 years I was at the University of Northern Colorado, I never ever felt like any professor was going to attack me for my views. I never felt like my grades suffered because of my views. My grades were rather crappy because I took a lot of classes to try to get through college, and I didn't go to class very much because I like to sleep. And I also like to drink and party a lot, and that can sometimes get in the way of the whole going to class thing. But I did my degree in 2.5 years, so there you go. But for all the things that I did and all the other stuff I got up to, it was not because of my views. And that's the way it should be. I also always tell a story. Every year, there was this pro life anti abortion group that would come to our campus and they would put up um, these large placards of pictures of babies in the womb, pictures of abortion, very gruesome, terrible stuff. And there was at the time some movement from some of my fellow classmates to say, oh, we should, the school shouldn't allow that. These should be destroyed. And I would always say, no, no. It's always more effective to counter something you do not agree with by saying that which you do. And so every year they would bring their signs and put them up. And every year we would dutifully protest. And we would be out and about in front of those signs promoting our point of view. That's what should happen in a politically civilized, democratic society. And so if, Mr. Kirk were still alive, I would say our best option to counter him is to speak louder against the things that he says, to make our points more vociferously, to research a little bit harder, to be a little bit smarter when someone goes and confronts him. That is the way to do it. What has happened here has been devastating for his family, for this country, for current political discourse. I feel like this has, for better or for worse, become a flashpoint. And I'm very concerned with where we go from here. I'm very concerned with what will happen from here. I'm concerned with what people will do. And that really represents a very specific moment in our country. And I was on the phone with some family yesterday, and I said, this has big Reconstruction energy. In terms of, after the Civil War, we needed to rebuild the South, so we put in a program called Reconstruction. And by 1877, federal troops had been in the South for quite some time, enforcing federal laws, all this sort of thing. Rutherford B. Hayes got his votes to get into the White House by saying, I'll bring this to an end. And Reconstruction had become expensive and unpopular. And the attitude in the North was, we can never stop these people from being racist, so let's give up and move on. And that's what happened. And I think that tense energy that is very similar to the Compromise of 1850, the beginning of the Civil War, the end of Reconstruction, I feel like we're in that energetic place again where we have a choice as a nation how we want to proceed forward. And for better or for worse, Tyler Robinson of Utah has made that fork in the road very painful, deadly for Mr. Kirk and his family, and obvious. And I think it remains to be seen which path we'll be choosing going forward. But I know that this is one of those moments, one of those turning points, if you will, to borrow a phrase, that we'll remember for quite some time. This is Gamergate. This is Pizzagate. this is that moment. And the effects of this will reverberate outward for quite some time. This is not going away anytime soon. And my only hope, and I don't think we're going to go this direction, but I would hope that we would go to the lighter, better path. I think it is interesting that in all these discussions about free speech and Jimmy Kimmel and all this sort of thing, that there's been some strange allies. I find myself in agreement with Ted Cruz, of all people, on a lot of these things. It's a very raucous and difficult time. It's rumored that Trump's going to sign an executive order branding Antifa as a terrorist organization. That's a little bit difficult. Antifa doesn't really exist as a thing. There's no, it's a concept, it's an idea, it's an online term to start with, but there's not really, I don't know who they're going to go try to arrest, because I don't think there's actually anyone to arrest, sort of thing. But that is, where we are, as a nation and a country right now. And there is more stuff to come, but I will always be a strong advocate for keeping government, at least, as far away from controlling what people say in either direction as possible. Now, if people choose to or to not engage with something, that's up to them. If companies choose to or to not have something on their platform, that's up to them. But I get very uncomfortable when government, regardless of who's in power, begins to take on that role. And when people think that's funny, I say, we had a taste of it during COVID and it didn't go well. We have very much proof. The FBI increased its number of requests on takedowns on social media by tenfold, trying to control the narrative around the vaccines during COVID. That was a wrong and terrible thing for the Biden administration to do. Should not have been done, because government should never, ever, 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 under any circumstances, go near people's speech. The minute that starts to happen, very bad things start to occur. And we have modern examples of that. We needn't go back very far. What Putin has done in Russia, what Viktor Orban has done in Hungary, is an excellent example of what happens when that starts to happen. And especially in an environment where you have shades of authoritarianism and a lot of government overreach occurring, it is now in these moments where our voice is the most valuable thing that we have, which has made sitting on the sidelines the last couple weeks dealing with some personal matters regarding the show a little bit difficult, because I need to be out there, sort of thing. It's, oh yes, so we have a comment in the YouTube section. Yeah, they're preventing residents from going in and out of the specific part of the neighborhood. They want people want their ideas to make sure they're not ice or whatever. Yes, there is a small part of one neighborhood. It's in Capitol Hill, I think, in Seattle, which is the neighborhood in Seattle, actually, where some idiots were out setting up a checkpoint to they were trying to look for ICE agents in order to prevent them from moving freely around the city. One, that's highly illegal and not their job by any stretch of the imagination. Arrest these people, sort of thing. And two, I understand anti-ICE sentiment, especially if you are a pro-immigrant advocate or all this sort of thing, but trying to root out ICE agents and attack them personally is not the best advocacy. It is, and it's illegal, and it's not good. It makes for bad headlines, bad impressions, bad messaging, and also, did I mention it's highly illegal? And also, you're forgetting these people are human beings too. If someone's going to get their medication or a gallon of milk, that's not the time to attack them. Go protest at the detention center in Tacoma. We all used to do that back in the day when Obama was in power, and he was putting immigrants there. That's where we should be protesting. Bring a sign and water. It's going to get hot out there. There's a lot of very unfortunate things that people are doing in this political moment because we're getting to the outer fringes and we're getting to the outer extremes. And people trying to stop people in Seattle trying to find ICE agents is an excellent example of some of the dumb things happening in this moment. And this is where I kind of return to this idea that we have been so politically hijacked and polarized by algorithms who play on our emotions, mostly of anger and very little else, um, instead of thinking with our brains and operating within our law and within our society. There have been moments in American history where civil disobedience is 110% required. Stopping real people in the street to get their ID to see if they work for ICE is not civil disobedience. That's attacking people. And that is not, it's not, one, it's not effective protest. Somebody's organized protest. One, it's not effective. You're not moving the needle on anything. You're bothering somebody. Two, it's illegal. And three, that's not even the most effective form to protest that issue. You know, and we've been having a discussion all summer about ICE in the streets and picking people up and protesting at facilities and all this sort of thing. And a lot of that stuff, some of it was great, other of it was horrifically inappropriate. Other people used their voice in their protest, especially out in St. Louis, to prevent some wonderful people who were here for decades, who had done really nothing wrong other than being here illegally, and prevented them from getting deported. That's a much more appropriate thing. You're going to government, getting your redress of your grievance, and actually genuinely helping somebody in a terrible situation who's getting caught up in a dragnet of anti-immigrant sentiment in these days. That is a far superior thing to do. And all of this shows a really terrible breakdown in what we're doing, how we're talking about this, and how our politics is and is not working in today's environment. And for my own self, I want to be a voice of returning to normalcy, of returning to having real conversations, and remembering that we are people who live in a common society, and the humanity has to go both ways. I always joke that I don't need you to not be racist, I just need you not to pass legislation up against black people, but you can be racist privately in your home. That joke is excellent for trans people, for gay people, for a lot of other issues as well. Too often times we're making moral judgments on people based upon what they said. Again, I don't like very much of what Charlie Kirk said. We had to agree on very little politically, but I don't necessarily think he was a bad or terrible person. In some cases, he seemed quite nice. Um, my heart goes out to his grieving widow. His funeral was yesterday. 90,000 people attended it in Glendale, Arizona. As a funny anecdote, Grindr also crashed during that time, which keeps the secret gay Republicans thing going, which I think is hilarious. Um, but that we have to remember that we are people always. These are other human beings always. And we have a responsibility in a liberal democracy to respect that first and foremost of all. And that goes for both sides. The political discourse is very good at sucking the humanity out of everyone and everything. And some very unfortunate and regrettable things get said and done. People get polarized and radicalized. I think it's been very hard, and this gets into kind of why Tyler Robinson was radicalized. I think it is very hard to be a young person in this political environment. I was very lucky. My youth happened, my under 18 childhood happened before social media was really a thing. Okay, we had MySpace back then. Like, I was an early adult when social media happened and things began to change. But for my younger colleagues who were born much younger, like Tyler Robinson was born in 2003, they've never known a world where we read the morning newspaper, listened to Peter Jennings at night, and that was our news consumption for the day. That world never existed for them. The online, politically charged, politically polarized, emotional world, that's all they've ever known. And I think it's very easy, especially for young men trying to find their place, their sense of belonging in the world. It's very easy for them to fall into communities that can encourage them to do very dangerous things. And that's what happened to Tyler Robinson. As much as he's a perpetrator of a terrible political assassination, he's also a victim of the times. And it's very hard and unpopular to remember the humanity in someone who has committed such a heinous crime. But he also is a victim of a certain online culture and a certain discussion about the world that is extremely toxic, that is nihilistic in its view, and they call it being blackpilled for a reason, is nihilistic in its view and doesn't see any hope for a future for them or anyone else. And so it ends up with a terrible fatalism. And I saw the early shades of this when I was his age, which was not recently. That was 15 years ago. We visited 4chan with on wooden tablets with sticks. I saw the early shades of that. And today I was talking about my history with the manosphere and men's and masculinity issues with David Beckemeyer on Outrage Overload, and the whole, long history. I've been writing about that for, 10, 15 years at this point. The long tail history of that. And I think we sometimes forget that as much as we're prepared to handle these terrible things and whatnot as adults, for a young person, that's politics. That's the world. And it can lead to that cynical, nihilistic fatalism that this last couple weeks, has turned deadly. And we had this discussion a long time ago with Luigi Mangione shooting the CEO of United Healthcare, and we're now having this discussion again. We're in a time of lead. I think the one I find most disappointing is there's no one advocating to turn down the temperature on either side. I said if I were the DNC right now, I would have every major Democrat on some splashy video in soft lighting calling for calm and de-radicalization of everyone and bringing social media companies to account. They've never made that video. I've been disappointed in the lack of advocacy coming from my side of the aisle for genuine free speech, for living in an open liberal society, even though that's supposed to be our whole dealio over here. There's been a lack of advocacy for that. Instead, it has been either silence, hold the doors, because the right is very angry with us right now, or it has been spewing the same amount of vitriol back. And I worry what that means for our country long term. I'm afraid for us. And I'm going to close the show with this evening. We're going to be a little bit short tonight. I'm a human being. If you're watching this within the sound of my voice, you're a human being. Charlie Kirk was a human being. Right now, we do need unity. We need to start thinking about what's the nature of the country and society that we wish to live in, and start having that discussion in a very potent and meaningful way. Now, if you're on the fringe of the right or the left, you may feel like we're coming after to and we're trying to exclude you. That feeling's valid. I feel like all of our political discussion has been pulled to the fringe in either direction. And it has turned deadly. It continues to turn deadly. Everyone's forgotten a man went up to a set of Democratic lawmakers in Minnesota and shot them this summer. Shot the dog, too. Which is particularly heinous. This is a time of lead. And in Italy, the political violence didn't end till the early 80s, and it just kind of petered out. There wasn't really anything that they could do. I think right now, we have to constantly be calling to our better selves, our better statements, our better everything. There's a lot of things that are happening. 50% of Project 2025 has been completed. We are losing programs. We are losing support. We are losing a lot of things in government. We're losing a lot of civil society that has made this country great. And all I ask everyone in this whole discussion is to remember not Charlie Kirk as someone who said inflammatory, crazy things online, which he did, but to remember him as a man, as a human being, as a father of two, and someone who had a loving wife. And someone who, despite it all, should be alive today. And that's coming from an overeducated, coastal, liberal elite who he would have never regarded as someone probably even worth talking to. My audience is too small anyway. But I regard him, and I wish he were counter-programming against me tonight. And we are poor for not having his voice. And with that, I will leave you. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the Cameron Journal News Hour. My name is Cameron Cowan. Please catch up with me online, on Twitter, Instagram at Cameron Cowan, Facebook, facebook.com/Cameron L. Cowan, and at Cameron Journal on TikTok and Blue Sky. If you need to sign up for the newsletter or Cameron Journal Plus, please visit CameronJournal.com. The newsletter comes out every Saturday, usually in the evening, and get it delivered directly to your inbox. If you're already on Substack and can't stand subscribing to one more thing, I got you. CameronJournal.substack.com. Today's interview is with John Didakis, who is a former editor for Wolf Blitzer on CNN, and we talk about his new fiction book, Enemies Within, and we talk about him being in the White House press room in the 80s. And that interview took place several weeks before all of this, so it's kind of a very interesting sort of thing. And I would also invite you to check out my little live talk with Outrage Overload David Beckemeyer today. Thank you so much. My name is Cameron Cowan. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.